Okay, let's make a start. We are at the we are now, if I'm not mistaken, we're up to the new sugya. If someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're 3 lines on the bottom of the Chesam with base. Is that correct? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to deal with a fundamental question, which is just a basic question about the whole sugya, and that is, what is macha? How does it work? What do you actually have to say? How do you make an objection? How do you formally object and make sure it's a valid objection? You want to make sure it's a valid objection in halacha, because if it isn't, we messed up, and then the guy is going to have a chazaka, right? That's the key question. So what is a macha? How does it work? It says, first thing Azir says is, saying so-and-so is a gazlan, it's not a macha. Just saying so-and-so, the guy is a thief, that's not good enough. Why? Well, it's obvious, really. Because what's going to happen? They're going to go along. Adam, for example, going to carry. We're talking here, as Rosh Hashanah explains, where you make an objection somewhere else. We're going with the tzad. You can make a macha wherever wherever you are, as long as the news will travel. Which you recall from the whole thing. What was that? Yeah, the chavra is a friend has a friend, and will carry. Fine. So that's going to carry, right? It's going to carry. But the thing is if Adam are going to say to the machzik, right? This guy said you're a gazlan, said you're a thief, right? He's not going to make him look after his document about the field, about his star about the field, right? Because he's going to say, well, what way am I a thief? I'm a shoplifter. I'm not, I'm not. You haven't specified in what way I'm a thief. Therefore, Razud says, Palnia Gazlano. What is the case of macha? It's where you say, Palnia Gazlanahu, so-and-so is a thief because he is consuming, he's using my land in theft. And the next day, tomorrow, Tovano le ledina, I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Havya macha. That is a macha. So it's very interesting because this is what the Rosh Hashanah is going to discusses here. How much of this phraseology is actually essential? He's added several points here. Rosvida said that the notion of an objection of a macha is that you say so-and-so is a thief because he's stolen my land, he's using my land in theft, and I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Now the question is, do you need to say l'mocha tavana lebedina? Tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Why is that? What does that add? Why is that necessary? Is that a necessary part of what you have to say or not? And then Rosh Hashanah is going to give 2 different perspectives on that. Right.
We've not seen that.
What?
The idea I'm going to take the Beis Din.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is something new.
Yeah, it is. It is. We've never. Well, we're defining now. We're defining what it is, what a macha is, and the question is why whether you have to actually say those words or it's just the norm. Would that be is that just the normal way of speaking? And this is something which the Rosh Hashanah is going to give to. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about an objection on the other side of the world or wherever, but the news will travel. And the question is, what is it you have to say? And it's very important you get it right, otherwise you end up using your land.
Also, it's an unusual terminology. It's taken my land through theft.
Yeah.
Why would you say he's stolen my land?
Well, I think it's kind of the same thing. There's just a way. Yeah. Well, I think it's saying he's using the land in theft. You see, there's a technically simple answer to why it's phrased that way, because you can't really take land. You can't really steal land. How do you steal land? What do? You dig it up? The answer is you misappropriate use of it through theft. Yeah, but that's different. You see, you can steal something movable, but how do you steal land? You're using my land in theft. That's right. You can't move it. So that is the anyway. That's what he says. Okay, let's see the Rashbam. Rashbam is on the bottom of the previous Amud from 4 lines in the end. 4 lines on the bottom. How is the case of macha? We are going on an objection that's not in front of him. The pasikna le'el nahavi macha, right? That we paskin above that it's a macha. We paskin above that it's a macha. It's an objection. It's an objection. The implication being the implication of the Rashbam is that this phrase is really, and the specific phraseology, it seems to be only relevant for a case where it's not in front of him. So the question is, the news to travel and everything else. But if you're in front of him, then anything, it sounds like anything at all could be a phrase, which is anything can be considered a machal, whatever the objection is. Yeah. So I've got written in my Gemora from Avram Gurvitz. Yeah. So it is. So Amar Zudros, this is Amar Sadi. Amar Sadi, he said the Adim Panigas Lanu, so and so is a thief, it's not an objection. Because even if the Adim say this phrase to the Machzik, that's not going to make him careful about his star. The Holo Yoda, am I calling a Gazlan? She's over star because he doesn't know why he's calling him a Gazlan. They should be careful about his star. He's got no idea. Someone says a thief, it could be a shoplifter, it could be anything, it's not relevant. But if he says to him, so and so is a thief, because he's consuming my land in theft, because I didn't sell it to him. The hashtavalele is the hori b'shtar mechiras sodezu. And now he should be careful with the shtar of the sale of this land, because this person is creating a problem with it. He's ma'ara on it. And therefore, it is an objection. And that's why it's a machal. And the next part was, he said to him, and tomorrow, Tavana le Bedina, I'm going to take him to Beis Din, I'm going to claim from him in Beis Din, Hare ze machal. This is an objection. Says the Rashbam, top of the next Omud, V'ilo Omar, if he doesn't say the machal Tavana le Bedina, and tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din, Umafik nomine, and I'm going to take it away from him. Ela ploni gazlan, all he says is so and so is a gazlan because he's using my land in theft. Bilvad alone, that's all he says. Says the Rashbam, Hareu kanosin pagam v'chaveroi v'lo kamosa edus v'eino mecha. It's like he's just slandering him, right? Putting a defamation, he's defaming him. And he's not like he's actually being mosa edus. He's not actually handing over testimony about him, and therefore it's not an objection. Interesting. Ben Chanan's approach is, you have to say these words. Tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Why? Because otherwise, what have you said?
Anyone can say anything.
Exactly, anyone can say anything. You're a thief because I'm telling you, because you're using my land in theft. Okay, so you defamed me, right? Let's have it out in court, maybe. But I don't know, maybe you're lying, that's not the same as a macha. A macha is, you have taken my land, and I will take you to Beis Din over this point because you're in my land. That's how Rabbi Birnbaum understands it. And otherwise, and that is what classifies as a mecha. It's interesting he uses this phrase of mosa edus. It's like giving over edus. I mean, it's a funny phrase if you think about it, because he's not an aid. He's a baldit. He's a claimant. But it's like he is. It's mosa edus. I think he means like this. It's mosa edus in the sense that the lomdus of mecha, is the edim. Do you understand? What is the real lomdus of mecha? The lomdus is, I'm in the land, no one objected, squatter's rights, you sold it to me, it's mine. Yeah, I've got no shtar. It's been 3 years. 3 years. Do you want to go on? No, it's fine. There's one over there, probably. There's a little one here. It's only small. We're Lamed Lamed Tesam Adalat. Now, the point is, let's think about it for a second, right? So the person is in the land 3 years, didn't object. I don't know my shtar anymore. It's mine. I prove it's mine because no one objected. If I object, what am I really doing? It's not really the force of my objection is not just. It's not just the fact that I get up and say you're lying. It's not. This is not a sort of like he said, she said situation, right? I say this, you say that. Who says who knows? No one knows. No one knows who says who's telling the truth, right? The significance of mecha, of objection, is the fact that it's got the strength of the people I say the mecha to. That they inform you. In that sense, it's a bit like being mosa edus. It's like giving over a form of testimony. It's not really because I'm just objecting, but really the point is that I'm saying it in such a way that people will carry it to you, the fact that I've objected. That's the whole idea of how Machal works. So I think he's saying that That's the qualitative difference with the person who says, you're in my land in theft, you stole my land, you're not allowed to be there, and I'm going to take you to Beis Din. That extra addition of I'm going to take you to Beis Din, that is the moment when he's almost like reached the level of lodging a formal complaint, which almost has the strength of Adus. That makes sense. It's not really Adus because it's not, he's talking about himself, right?
Are we talking in a situation where the man Maksik is not there?
Yes.
In other words,
exactly
if
that.
the Maksik is there,
Yeah.
does that make a difference?
It does. If the Maksik is there, it sounds like you can do anything. You can say anything. You can just say you're a thief. You can stand there next to the field and shout at him, and that's enough of the Machal.
So I guess
that's why it needs to be more of
It's foreign, isn't it? That you guys going, and he's going to take you to Beis Din.
Yeah, exactly. So it's got to have a certain strength. Exactly that. That's exactly what it is. However, not everyone agrees. Another version says, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yokor. I heard this from the learning, whatever, of Rabbi Yaakov. His explanations of the sugya, whatever. This is and he says this is the main pshat, not right. Rabbeinu Chanan, Rabbeinu Ashbam himself holds like this one. Palne Gazlanahu, so and so is a thief. Afilu his gal karkas shemachzik, and even if he mentions it about this land that he is machzik, lav machahu, it's not an objection. Sharila micha machmas atzmoi, because he's not objecting, because through his own loss. In other words, he's not saying that it's my field. He's going back. The Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yaakov is going back to the beginning of the sugya. It's like he's saying so and so is being machzik in other people's land. And he's just coming again to defame him. Pagam is pagam is a fault, default. Yes, he's a fault. He's coming to say there's a problem with him. He's not coming to ma'arer. He's not coming to claim to sort of be ma'arer and say you're claiming this is your land. I'm saying it's my land. Because he's not mentioning that it's his. So, in other words, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yaakov goes back to the beginning of the Gemora. He says like this: when Rav Zid wanted to highlight by saying so and so is a thief, that's not a machal. What he meant was Rav Zid's chiddush was, even if you say so and so is a thief on this piece of land, that's not enough, because then all you are is you've detached yourself from the case. You're just saying that so and so is a thief and he's stolen this piece of land. You're not involving yourself in the case. Okay. But if he specifies and says that he's consuming my land theft, my land, he's then objecting through himself, himself, right? And he's informing that his own land, he is being machzik in sin. Avla is a sin. And that is an objection. And even if he doesn't conclude his words by saying, tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din, he doesn't have to say that. According to Rabbi Yaakov, he doesn't need to say, tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Or Pirushu, that's just an explanation. It's not necessary to say those words, tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din. It's just an explanation. It's the obvious outcome. If you say, so-and-so is a thief because he's eating my land, he's using my land in theft, the obvious outcome and the obvious thing that's going to happen is, I'm going to take him to Beis Din. What was that?
Get it back.
Yeah, right? That's what's going to happen, yeah? Okay? So, so therefore, what we're going to do is now, it's just understand, that the Tosfos has an interesting take on this as well. If you look at the previous Omid, Tosfos says, the previous Omid, the little Tosfos at the bottom, like the first Pshat in the Rashba, the second Pshat. He doesn't need to say, I'm going to take him to Beis Din. Just a normal way. Because otherwise Rav would have said, so-and-so is a thief who's using my land in theft, is not an objection. And so-and-so is a thief who's consuming my land in theft, and tomorrow taking the base din, that's a machar. So Tosfos has a very simple proof, right, for the second pshat in the Rashbam. And maybe that's why the Rashbam likes the second pshat. Because had it been the case like the first pshat, right, that you have to actually say the words, I'm going to take him to Beis Din, right? Had it actually been there, then the Gemara would have made that chiluk. The Gemara would have said, bigger chiddush. Rav Zvid says, if you say so-and-so is a thief because he's using my land in theft, that's no good. But if you say so-and-so is a thief because he's using my land in theft and I'm going to take him to Beis Din, that's a machal. He doesn't do that. He switches from 1 to 3. He says, so-and-so is a thief is no good, but so-and-so is a thief who's in my land in theft. Take him to Beis Din, that's a machal. So the fact that he switches, do you understand? He gives the extreme, he goes straight from 1 clause to 3 clauses. The implication is, right, that the third clause is really superfluous. Tomorrow I'm going to take him to Beis Din. That's not really relevant. You don't have to say that. It's just the normal. It's what you normally say. And the critical thing you need to say is, so-and-so is a gazlan because he's in my land in theft, right? And because and that's the difference between the two pshatim in the Rashbam. The first pshat in the Rashbam is Rabbeinu Chananel, and he says you have to say those words, otherwise you're just defaming him. It's not serious. It's got to be a serious thing. I'm going to take you to court, right?
And this is the machar.
Yeah, I'm going to take you to court. Says Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yoko, no. As soon as you put yourself into the equation, right, then you're not defaming anymore. As soon as you put yourself in the equation and you're informing him that it's your land, you are in my land, you are stealing my land that belongs to me, right? Then that's enough. That is enough of an objection because that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for more than that, right? It's not. We're trying to achieve more than defamation. Defamation is when you stand up on a soapbox in Hyde Park and you say, so this guy is a thief, right? Yes, you've defamed him, and he might be able to take you to court, or he might not.
No.
Well, can't really know. There's got to be an effect of the libel, no? There's got to be an impact, no? Well, there's got to be a loss in English law, which is interesting. That booklet was very interesting. Did you read that booklet? The one, the power of this clean speech project, worth reading it. Judge Ziedman brought a comparison of English and Jewish law on defamation. Very interesting. It's a very brief booklet. It's a couple of pages. Yeah, it's very interesting because in Jewish law, obviously, it's defamation. In other words, it's motzi shemra, even without a loss. If I'm motzi shemra, if someone's a thief, then I'm already over motzi shemra, right? Whereas in English law, you can't.
Usually, there is an exception actually. If it's an allegation of professional whatever
Misconduct or something.
Or lack of credibility, then it's actionable per se.
Presumably because there would be the potential for loss. Someone you're never going to be able to quantify it. How would you know who didn't use the company or didn't use the person because of their whatever? Interesting.
What I don't understand is why there'll be a difference between whether you're in the same country or whether you're miles away.
I think it's because if you're in front of the person, again, what are we trying to achieve here? The purpose of machar is just to make sure that you look after your shtar. Instead of saying, at the end of 3 years, I didn't bother keeping it. Who keeps documents? Of course you keep documents. If you know someone's knocking on your front door claiming ownership, yeah, you're going to keep your documents, right? So if someone turns up at your field or your house, because remember, a house is the same as a field, he knocks on your front door and says, by the way, you should know you're in my house. Okay? It doesn't matter what else he says. Or even if he just says you're a thief, that's enough. It's so in your face, you're for sure going to keep the documents. But if he's living far away, so you're going to make all sorts of excuses. The human mind has endless capacity for justification. This is a very, very important club, right? You know, we are built. We have seeming endless capacity for just self-justification, right? So this, in other words, if he's in the other country and he says I'm a thief, so I'm a thief. Maybe I didn't mean it. Doesn't mean the field. He doesn't mean the house, right?
Some people are very shy about speaking out and threatening legal action, so maybe that's why it's enough to just say you stole my land. For some people, that's a big deal to say just that. Maybe
It's true, and that's an interesting. Well, you mean if he's just in front of him? No, but why if he's? But it's only enough if he's in front of him. But it's only if he's in front of him. Remember, if he's not in front of him, we do need to. It's according to Rabbeinu Chananel. We have to.
That's a big deal.
It is. Yeah. Although in some cultures, people are very happy to throw around lawyer letters.
It's true. If someone's
Depending on
getting
where.
stolen your house, you might be prepared to go on a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep.
Send a threat.
I would-
Send a threatening letter. Yeah, send a threatening letter. Okay. Anyway, right. So now the Gemara carries on this. Omar, if he says, now the Gemara is going to basically do, it's a classic sugi this, because the Gemara is now that we've established what machar is, and we understand what it is, although we've got that debate exactly about the third clause, we understand what machar is, we now have to establish the parameters of machar, which means, when is a machar not a machar? What can you do to your machar to sabotage it? Or what can the people you hope to carry your machar do to sabotage it? And the obvious question is, why would anyone do this? The answer is that's irrelevant. We're trying to define the parameters, right? What will you do to destroy this machar, to make it ineffective to the extent that it won't work? And the nafkamina being, he's going to have a good chazaka. And we're going to go through multiple different cases, multiple different scenarios where you or the edim place, that means you the ma'arer, yeah, or the people you are talking to, either one of you, place limitations on the machar. For example, you make a condition. The first case is, Omari said to the edim, Loi teimrule, don't tell him. Don't tell him. So you said to him, you make it, you're the guy Paul was just describing. You don't like threatening legal action. So you say the words, but you're so fearful of having said the words, I'm going to take you to court. You say that, but don't tell him. You say, don't tell him. Now the obvious reaction is like, that's ridiculous. Like, why? Right?
So what you would say when you're protesting, then mess up.
Yeah, there's that. Why would you do that? The answer is we don't care.
I'm not saying why. I'm saying you're saying something.
Yeah, then you're limiting it. Yeah. So
say something else. Should have.
Again, at the end of the day, what we're trying to say is that it's exactly yours. The question is it still a valid machar if you told him not to tell him? Now the critical word here is lo teimrule. Don't tell him. That doesn't mean don't tell anyone. Don't tell him. Right? Rav Papa says Rav Papa and Rav Papa Omar ledidei lo teimrule. Sorry, I skipped a line, didn't I? Omar lo teimrule. They said don't say anything to him. My Omar, that's what he said. Omar Rav Zvid haka Omar lo teimrule. Rav Zvid looks at it simply and says, he said, don't tell him. If he said don't tell him, obviously it's not a valid machar because you told him not to say. You told the person you were talking to, or the people you were talking to, Rashbam says it's Adim, the people you were talking to, you told them not to tell anyone. You didn't tell them not to tell him. Rav Papa says, no, it's still a valid machar because because they won't tell him. But they'll tell others. He didn't restrict them from telling other people. He just said to them, don't tell him. You can tell other people. And therefore, we apply the principle of, many times we've seen this, chavra islay, your friend as a friend. Chavra islay, and the friend of your friend as a friend. Which means someone's going to hear about it.
How can that work that when you said specifically, don't tell him?
Don't tell him.
Yeah, but
You can tell everyone else.
he's the one that needs to hear about it.
You can tell everyone else.
I know, but you
So he'll hear. So he'll hear. Our Papa says he'll hear.
you intentionally.
Who cares? You've excluded him because you've told them not to tell him. Right? Right? That's it. Why did you do that?
Maybe he's an intimidating person. That's why he's stolen the land in the first place. So that's why he doesn't want to rattle his cage.
Yeah, or maybe he has Rachmanis. No. Or maybe he has Rachmanis on these Eidim. So he says, listen, I'm telling you this, but I feel for you because I fear that you're going to get attacked if you tell him. So don't say anything. Don't tell him yourselves. Don't tell him yourselves, right? The implication being, it will get there. It will get there.
Seem to hear about it.
Yeah, exactly. But Rav Zvid says it's no good, finished, because you limited it in that way, and therefore it's not good. And Rav Papa says, no, it's perfectly good. Perfectly good. Says the Gemara, what happens if Omrule, now we switch it on to them, if they said to him, Lo Yamrin on lay. So he didn't say anything to them, but they said to him, the Adam said to the Ma'arer, Lo Yamrin on lay. We are not going to tell him. Not very useful, Adam, but that's what they said. Why do they have to what?
We're not going to go to telling him.
It's interesting. No, it's interesting. Do they have the right or not? It's not a question of whether they did or didn't, I suppose. They just said that. He told them this information, and they said, you should know, we have no intention of telling. We're not going to tell him. Why? Maybe we're scared of him as well. Yeah, whatever. We don't want to tell him. We don't want to tell him. So Amar Rav Zvid says, Haka Amrulei, La Aminulei. Same thing. Rav Zvid takes the same position. They said we're not going to tell him. If they said we're not going to tell him, how's it good machal? Right? Rav Papa Amar who says Ladidei La Aminulei. All they meant was we're not going to tell him. We are not going to tell him. La Achrini Amrilahu, but they'll tell other people. And again, your friend is a friend. So therefore he will hear. He will hear.
Do you have the notion of anonymous witnesses?
What do you mean anonymous
In
witnesses?
other words, you have agent, they don't want to identify themselves.
Yeah, and they can tell someone else. No, you can't have that in a base.
Witness protection.
You can't have that in a base. Witness protection is an interesting question. It's an interesting question whether that exists in halacha. Yeah, interesting. Do they? I don't think it can, because in halacha, yeah, you have to be made lifnei baldin. You have to be made in front of the baldin. If you're not prepared to be made in front of, you're not prepared to testify in front of the baldin, there's a problem with your edus. Pardon?
To the base thing you go before.
No, you have to be in front of the baldin. Yeah, in front of the baldin. The baldin is the claimant. You have to be there in front of the person you're testifying against. Part of the whole system is that it has to be that you're prepared to carry through, because the Eidim are the ones who put him to death as well. The Eidim put the guy to death.
No, it's nice.
Or at least Yato Eidim Tiabo Roshona, the Torah says. Yato Eidim Tiabo Roshona. If not, Yad Kolam V'Achrona, spelled out in the Torah. Yato Eidim come first. Shoftim, you say what was that? There are different. I think there are differences, but the principles of Edus are the same. I don't think you can have Edus unless it's in front of the Baldin. I don't think so.
Natural justice.
Yeah. So, anyway, so this is how it is. Let's see the Rashbam on the two differences. They're taking the same opinions both cases. Amale Edim, the second Rashbam on the Amad. If he says to the Edim, Lo Teimu Le Machazu, don't tell them this Macha. Amar Zvid, it's not an objection to Hala Amrule Edim too, because the Edim didn't say afterwards to him, right? Because in other words, Rav Zvid says that because he said, don't tell him, he says, the Hala Amrule Edim too, the Edim are no longer going to tell him. And if they're not going to tell him, you haven't achieved the objective. Rav Papa, what? Yeah, they're not going to do anything. They're not going. That's what they're. Rav Papa, it's a good objection. This is what he was saying to Adam. Don't say anything to him. Tell other people. And since they tell others, the others will go and tell him. Because your friend has a friend, etc. Don't like that, Martin? What is? No, it's a machlokes. So as I said, it doesn't work. That's an interesting question. So we have to understand, actually. We have to really understand what is the machlokes from what are they disputing on. Let's just see the next two Rashbams, then we'll maybe come back to, because it's the parallel. It's not going on the case of where he says to them, don't tell him. The point of Rav Zvid, even if they're silent, they're having a fall. It's not an objection. Even if they don't respond, the coach again, how much more so. If they respond in the same way, in other words, he says, don't tell him. And they say, we're not going to tell him. Well, obviously, that's not going to work on Shosvit. Ella, rather, Milsa Ba'api Nafshi. It's a new case. He gave them a full objection. But Tzivom Loy Maloi. And he told them to tell him. V'heim Anu, but they answered him, we're not going to tell him. V'loi Chazar Umicha Achareicheim. And he didn't object afterwards, because obviously, if he went afterwards and objected in front of other Eidim, the whole thing would be irrelevant, because then he's told others, so that's okay. Cases where he's only objected in front of these people. They said to him, we're not going to tell him. Since they're not going to tell him, this guy should have objected in front of others. We'll tell him. And if he doesn't object afterwards, he's lost out. But Rav Papa says, Papa says he doesn't need to object anymore in front of other people. Because it's a perfectly good objection. Because this is what they're saying to him. Right? To him, we're not going to tell anything. They're just saying we're not going to go to his place. We're not going to go as far as where he lives. We'll tell other people. Okay. Says next Rashbam. To others we will say. So the Rashbam says, Rav Papa Kodayik, Rav Papa infers, lo teimu lei, lo emrinon lei. Rav Papa is medayik, the word lei. He says, don't tell him, and they say, we're not going to tell him. The mashma, the implication is, lei lo emrinon, we're not going to tell him, aval achrini omri, but we're going to tell others. Midloi omar, from the fact that he did not say, lo teimru, do not say at all. So Rav Papa says that it's just him. It's just him that he was implying. He was implying. Now, from this Rashbam, this last Rashbam, right? I would say that the implication is that Rashbam understood that the machlokas between Rav Papa and Rav Zvid is simply how to interpret the words. In other words, Rav Papa says that all he meant was, don't tell him. And all they meant was, we're not going to tell him. But otherwise, it's a free-for-all. He was saying to them, I just don't want you to tell him why. I don't know why. Maybe I'm worried you're going to get attacked or whatever. I just want it to get there in a different way. And they said, we're not. And they were just informing him, we're not going to go that far. We're trying to work out what the words actually mean. Yeah, but Rav Zvid again, from this Rashbam, the implication is that, you understand what I'm saying? That he says Rav Papa is medayik the word lei, implying that Rav Zvid says that it's incorrect to interpret the words lei as being specific, don't tell him, or we won't tell him. No, he was saying, I don't want anyone to know about it. Yeah. And that's where it says it falls on its face. And it's not a good machor. Because it's nothing. He doesn't want it to go anywhere. No, they don't want it to go anywhere. They say we're not going to go anywhere. So you're saying basically we decide how will we decide what they meant? Who's deciding whether they mean it specifically? No, it doesn't matter what. It's just a different. There's a machlokas as to how to interpret what he meant. Rav Papa says you interpret it as meaning only this person. It's a narrow interpretation. As in Havdin, you have this in any legal system, right? You always have don't you? You have the narrow interpretation of the rule, no? You have the broad or the narrow interpretation, anything, right? Any legal clause, any law, and that's what people fight over. You go with the narrow interpretation of the law. Why? American Constitution is a good example of that, right? Every single clause in the American Constitution has been debated for centuries about there's a broad interpretation or a narrow interpretation.
The problem with Zvid's analysis means that they're saying don't tell anyone.
That's right.
And that doesn't have any logic to it at all. Why would you
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Agreed. But Populars make sense.
Yeah.
So if we learn it that way from Rav Zvid, it means that they're coming up with a scenario which is pointless.
Yeah, there's another problem as well. Pardon? Who's bluffing?
The guy that's saying I'm going to take it to court.
Well, he's not saying anything to anyone now.
He's saying, but whenever he's saying it, if he's not actually going to do it, then it's just a bluff.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not a serious thing. It's not a serious thing because he doesn't want anyone to know about it. You mean? No one's going to know. You don't have to make him a chor in front of base. You can say it anywhere, just as long as you have it in front of other people, to aid them, whatever. The implication here, at least, is to aid them. I mean, there's another problem as well, because the next Gemora, now the Gemora is going to transition into a case where he says, "Don't say anything." So, yeah, right. We're going to go into that case now. So this is where it gets a bit problematic because Rav Zvid, according to Rav Zvid, no, we're going to see new cases now. That the guy says, "Don't tell anyone."
So the isn't about whether or not he himself, the employee will be told.
Yeah, that's right. The machlokas seems to be from the Rashbam
Yeah.
Machlokes and Rabbi Mazvid is how to interpret the words of the Ma'ara. Does he mean don't tell anyone? In which case it clearly doesn't work. And we'll see in the continuation of the Gemora that where there's a phrase that is clear, then I think everyone agrees. We'll see. That's right. That's right. You can't. But you can misinterpret the words of Roulay, don't tell him. Because it could mean don't tell him, or it could mean don't tell anyone. Yeah, that's right. Are you medically one? That's the question. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a fair question. It's a fair question. It's a fair question. Tosfos here points out a different issue with Popper, because we saw earlier on that Shmuel holds that if he's Micha, if he objects in front of people who cannot tell him. We had that case before. They're elderly or they're infirm, right? They can't say anything. They can't do it, right? So he says that's different because there they can't go. Here they can go and they'll tell other people and other people will tell him. So there's no, doesn't mean there's a contradiction between you can agree with that. It's just different. Okay, so now let's see the next case. So the Gemara carries on. Omalahu, he said to them, Lo seifuk l'chu shusa. This phrase basically means don't say anything, don't speak, don't say anything. Shusa is like dibur, means speak, don't say anything at all. Right? Omar Rav Zvid says, Omar Rav Zvid says, Haka Omar lo seifuk l'chu shusa. Rav Zvid says, he said to them, don't say anything. So obviously it doesn't work. And here our Papa doesn't dispute that. It goes straight into the next case, right? It's just it's only one opinion brought in the Gemara. He said don't say anything. If he says don't say anything, obviously it doesn't work. Omrule, if they said to him, again a new case, lo mafkin on shusa, he didn't say anything, he just gave them a chol, and they said we're not going to say anything. Omar Papa says Omrule, lo mafkin on shusa. They said to him, we're not going to say anything. So obviously it doesn't work. So here, it's like an interesting thing. You understand? Before we had a machlokas, Papa and Rozvit. Here, Papa and Rozvit say the same thing. They just each address different cases, but they both agree that in the event where either the Ma'arer or the Eidim said, we're not going to tell anyone, or he says, don't tell anyone, it does not work. Clear? However, there's a dissenting view. He says, not so fast. People talk. What? Yeah. Anything which is not on a person's mind, he says, he schmoozes, he talks about, what does it mean it's not on a person's mind? It basically means that if it's something which it doesn't affect you personally, that you don't have to conceal it. It's not your field. It's not your field, and it's not your you used to own the field, you don't want to own the field now. So you're basically being asked to conceal something as a favor, really. What? It doesn't really matter. So if anybody says human nature is, you're going to tell something. It's a bit sad, really. It's a bit sad, really. What? It's going to get out. It's going to get out. Did you hear? You're going to a weak moment late at a Friday night dinner. Someone's going to, you're up to after a few drinks. You're up to the after dinner mints. Yeah, something's going to get out. He's not going to be able to sell this information. Did you know that Ruvain is actually in Shimon's field, right? Anyway, this happens. It happens. That's the reality. You have to deal with the reality of human nature. I was reflecting on that today at the Beis Din. I was talking to someone else, not one of the Dayanim, someone else who also works within the ambit of the Beis Din. I say it's difficult. The difficulty is that you get exposed to real human nature. And you see things you don't, and you see and hear things you don't want to see and hear. Do you know what I mean? Like you just don't. It's human beings, and human beings unfortunately do things that, that are just and it's no. You have to almost like strengthen yourself against like I don't know how to put it. Yeah, you want to try and preserve that idealism, right? Is this really going on? Is this really happening? Is this really happening? Are two people really doing this to each other? But never, unfortunately, that is the reality. Yes. The reality is the reality of life. Not always. Sometimes you see the opposite. Like anything, you see the amazing things about human beings as well. But this is the reality. So let's see the Rashbam. The second line down where it gets wide. Nothing should come out of your mouth. Not to him and not to others. Shusa is dibur. It's speech. Brings Gemora in Sukkah, which says the speech of a child in the marketplace is either something he heard from his father or his mother. Yes, that's if the child starts talking, that's what he may have heard it somewhere. So Razvid says, he said, don't say, and therefore it's not a macha. Amrule, the reverse case, if they say lo mafkin shus, we're not going to tell anyone. Lo, again, the Rashman goes to the same thing. Lo koi, it's not going ahicha to omar hu lo sapik l'chu shusa, where he said to them, don't say anything. Because there everyone agrees it's not an objection. Beina hadrule ben la hadrule shum dibber, whether they say something back or not makes no difference. If he said don't tell anyone, like Rav Zvid said, there's no dissenting view. Everyone says if he said don't tell anyone, it's garnished, it's nothing, right? Again, apart from Hanamida Bishur, but we'll get to that, right? It is a new case. The case is right? He commanded them, he told them to tell him. They said, we're not going to speak at all. Rav Papa says, here I definitely agree. It's not an objection. Because they said we're not going to tell anyone. We're not going to tell anyone. We're not going to tell him. We're not going to tell anyone else, and therefore it's not a valid objection. That's what our prophet says, because they said they're not going to say anything. But Omar of Rabbi Yeshua, he says, it is an objection. It's very good. It's fine. To call milsa any matter that is not placed upon a person, which means she'ena muteles olov. The Bach changes the text there. It's not placed upon him yet to, some say it's lechache, to deny, or lekisuya. He changes it to the other texts say lekisuya, to cover it. Something which is not upon a person. He doesn't have a responsibility to hide it on him. He doesn't have the personal responsibility to conceal it. It's just on his honor. The gam enu mafsid im omer im lo. And he's got no loss if he says it or doesn't say it. There's no personal loss. It doesn't affect him personally.
There's no personal interest.
No, there's no interest personally in him concealing this information. He will say it to people without thinking. Koloma, this means to say, he doesn't place it on his heart. He doesn't take it seriously enough. He accepted upon himself to keep the matter hidden. And therefore this guy doesn't need to object in front of other people, even though they said they're not going to tell anyone. Because he objected in front of people who are able to tell him, and they will. That's Rav Birnbaum. So do you see what's happening here? We actually it seems to be that there's no dispute against Rav Zvid that when he says don't tell anyone, everyone agrees that's no muchal. If he says I don't want you to tell anyone, that's nothing, because then the assumption is they're going to listen to him and they're not going to tell anyone. Why should they? Well, they've got no skin in the game. Why should they? If he says I'm objecting, but I don't need to tell anyone, so why should they tell anyone?
Trust. That's the point.
No, but we're not saying they've got great reliability, these people. It's just that we're not going to assume it's not going to get to him, right? If he said to them, don't tell anyone, we're going to assume it's not going to get to them. They're not going to say anything. Because he told them not to.
Yeah, but it's not negated, so they still might leak.
It doesn't sound like that's good enough.
I think it's because they're entrusting them not to say anything. Whereas
No, but Paul's asking, it's a bit of a contradiction, because we're saying they will leak.
Why would you tell someone not saying it? It's not their issue, they don't care about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see clearly, look at the last 2 lines of that Rashbam, because he spells out the halacha. He says, the hilchos of the halacha is, bein omar hamamacher, whether the person who is objecting says, lo teimule, don't tell him anything, mehani mili of these matters to the machzek. Ubein omru, on whether they said lo mafkinon shusa, we will not say anything. But kulu in all these cases, havya machal. It's a good machal. It works. Even if he says, don't tell him, okay, right? Or they say, we won't tell anyone. It's a good machal. Why? If he says, don't tell him, we go like a Papa before, that he just meant don't tell him, we can tell other people, so we'll get to him. And if they say, we're not going to tell anyone, we think they will, because they're not reliable, they're going to leak, right? Because it's not really something that bothers them, they're not going to lose or not, so they'll tell people, even though they said they wouldn't, right? However, bar exception, the only case where the machal doesn't work is where the objector says, I don't want you to tell anyone. And because he said, I don't want you to tell anyone, then that's not an objection. Is the same thing as well. So if the person who is creating the machal specifically puts a criteria and a clause and a condition saying, I'm objecting, but I don't want you to tell anyone, that is not a valid machal.
It may be because two reasons. One is they might be worried that they'll come on forward and say the thing, and then they'll just deny it.
Right.
And then they'll have egg on them.
Right. Yeah. Or
indicating
you were going to say another one. I thought you were going to say that it could be that it's a fault in the actual machal. If he limits the machal in this way to such an extent that he says, I don't want you to say anything, then maybe it's now irrelevant whether or not they leak it or not. He's fundamentally disturbed. He's ruined it to such an extent.
Yeah, that's insanity. Right.
So it still works when he says, don't tell him.
Yeah, because
There's nothing left to say. There's nothing left to tell.
There's nothing left to tell. Yeah. So this is actually discussed in Nayelas HaShachar, which is the sefer on Shas, Setos from Shas, written by Rabbi Birnbaum, or at least written by his Talmidim from his Shirim, who was Rosh Kollel in Ponovich, where I learned, I discussed to learn. Rosh Yeshiva's obligation to say Rosh Kollel was Rabbi Birnbaum. They knew how to think. Anyway, so he yesh la'ayin.
They said they was in the right tradition.
What was that? Oh, Gershom was writing shit. He made a writing shit. There's a picture, which I didn't actually mention on Shabbos, but there's a photo, which is a remarkable picture taken the night before he was nifta in hospital on the Monday evening of him giving shit. So there are three people in the hospital room, and he's giving shit. And the next day, he asked for a pen and a piece of paper, and he was preparing his shit. And Tuesday, he was nifta on a Tuesday. Tuesday evening, he always gave shmooze in yeshiva, the Musa shmooze. And one of his grandsons said, "But today," he asked him. He said, "Today is a shmooze day. What they call in Ivrit, a sichas Musa." And he said, apparently he said, "Ayom kvar lo yeh sicha." So today there's not going to be a shmooze. And it's he was, huh?
he said,
Yeah, he's the thing is, I mentioned it on Shabbos when speaking about. You understand, these people, he's not like that. He's living on a different level, different plane entirely. So the world saw him as a Gadol Hador, and they brought questions to him from all over the world, and political questions and whatever, and he was the Gadol Hador of the. He was a Maggid Shir for 70 years, 17-year-old boys. That was what he saw himself. Do you understand? That's what he did. He gave a shir for 70 years to 17-year-olds. And because of that, he was an incredible mechanech, and he understood like teenagers. Yeah. Now, of course, they were yeshiva bochrim, but they were 17. A 17-year-old is a 17-year-old, right? They might be yeshiva bochrim in Bnei Brak, but they're still 17-year-olds. And that was his main, he saw that as his main role. This is his main tafkid. That was what he did. Since he became a Maggid Shir, I think I don't know when was it. Yeah, I think it was 30. Anyway, and he gave share to the day before he was nifta. Yeah. So that is good. So anyway, Rabbi Birnbaum says, "Yesh la'ayin." Let's understand. We have to understand this. Is the reason why when he says don't tell anyone is the reason why it doesn't work. On the one hand, you could say mishum devadei lo yisapru, because they're definitely not going to tell anyone. The kibbutz his hero, since he told them, don't tell Osir lehem nasaper. Sorry, there's an issa on them. You're not allowed to reveal a secret. You know that. It's an issa. You know that. Someone tells you don't tell anyone, it's actually also to say to them. Do you know that? It's also legalo so. You're not allowed to reveal a secret if someone tells you not to, right? Now there can be cases in halacha where it's l'toeles, right? Someone's going to go into a bad partnership, a business deal, whatever. You know what I mean? Like we're familiar with we're not the complicated halachas, but you understand. But generally speaking, it's an issa legalo so. You're not allowed to reveal a secret. And that's why the objection doesn't work. You with me? Because they're not allowed. It's also for them to say anything because he told them, don't tell anyone. Or perhaps it's because right? Because he doesn't want it to get to the ears of the machzik. Even if, according to the MS, it would be allowed to say it. Maybe it could be Lutelis, for example, whatever. He needs to know that someone's after the field, it's machzik. Even if he could, even if it was permitted to say it, because he doesn't want it, it's not a good objection. So that's his chakira. Is it because it's osa for them to say, and therefore they will not say, or the reason is that it's not to do with the people he's talking to. It's nothing to do with them. The fact that they're not going to say because it's going to be osa for them to say because of Megala. It's just fundamentally flawed in terms of the machar, because he doesn't want it to get to the machzik, and therefore that's not a machar. Because by definition, a machar is where you want it to get to the machzik. You understand the two sides? You could say that who cares what you want? Who's interested in what you want? If you say something, that's a machar, right? There's two ways of looking at it. He says, he says, according to that which the Rashbam says, I'm not sure exactly where the Rashbam is, that there's no Lashon Hara. Must infer that somewhere from the Rashbam. That he's going to say something. It's not Lashon Hara because he's a toeles. It's a big toeles, right? It's a constructive thing. He's going to have to know to look after his documentation. So therefore, according to that, Oz gam kan mutter. So here as well, it would be mutter to say. It will be mutter for them to repeat it because there's no Lashon Hara because he needs it. It's loteles. Ve'ein lo ma, he says, and don't say the given damacha lo mahani ein tzorich lishma shtaroi. Since you don't say that since the machar doesn't work, he won't need to protect his shtar. Mimela ze lo tzorich. It's a lomdus, right? You could say like this: it doesn't become loteles anymore. It's a bit of a circular argument, right? What's the loteles? I've got to look after my documents so that you don't, because otherwise you're going to claim it's yours. But if the machar doesn't work, if it's not a good objection, I don't need to protect my shtar. And if I don't need to protect my shtar, there's no heter to say anything because I don't need because I'm not going to lose the field. Therefore, there's no need to say anything. He says no, don't say that. He says the other Rabba, because on the contrary, lama lo yehi machar kazuma. Why shouldn't this machar help? Nemo, he should say, he should have to protect his document via toeles hamachzik, and there will be a toeles. It's for the benefit of the machzik via mutzah legalos, right? And therefore it will be permitted to reveal it. So therefore, there's no reason why it shouldn't be why the machar should not work, right? Because ultimately, it would be mutter for them to tell him. It's a classic case of toeles. Yes, he said don't tell him. I don't want you to magalas it, but that's what at the end of the day. By the way, I'm just thinking it through. This is the obvious reason why he would say this, isn't it? Don't tell him. Why?
Because I want him to get rid of his
I want him to lose his documents. I get my land. Simple, really. No, he's going to make a machar so that he wants to do a valid machar which doesn't travel to the machzik, because then the machzik will lose his documents. He won't hold his documents because he knows that no one's objecting, and then he's going to tell him, I made an objection. It's mine. Are you going to tell me you've got no documents? You can tell me you've got no documents. It's your problem. Your problem. He says, therefore, it's definitely a toeles. It's clear they should be able to tell. They should be able to say something. Therefore, it must be the other side. It's nothing to do with them. It's nothing to do with whether or not they will carry the news. They're allowed to carry the news. They're allowed to say it. It's not toeles. They're allowed to tell him, right? The point is, it's because he doesn't want it to come to the ears of the machzik. Therefore, fundamentally, it's not a valid objection. Even if it's permitted for them to say, because it's like him telling himself privately at home. It's like him telling himself, it's like him saying privately when no one's there to listen, I'm making an objection. It's irrelevant, right? And therefore, it says, therefore, and therefore, now that it's not got a din machor, now that it's not a valid objection in halacha, because the objection itself is flawed, now it's also for them to tell him. Now it is also for them to tell him. Why? Because what's the heter for them to go and reveal this juicy piece of Lashon Hara? For his benefit. Why? Because if he doesn't protect his star, he's going to lose the field. But he's not, because the objection is not machar. He's not going to lose the field. So therefore they can't tell him. Okay. And then he brings interestingly that the Mukhi Yosef, the first from the Mukhi Yosef, who says differently. The Mukhi Yosef says that when he says don't tell anyone, it's not an objection because they won't say anything, because he handed it over in secret. But if they said we won't tell anyone, then since Kivan Sha'in Mutal Olav Be'issa Shulagalo, so in Rezolov Omer, since it wasn't an issa on them not to reveal it. Interestingly, the Mukhi Yosef has an interesting pshat. He says, what's the difference between the two cases? Why is it that we say that when he says to them, don't tell anyone, it is no good, it's not a valid machar, but when they say we will, it is. They say we won't. So they say we won't, it is. And the answer is because if he says, don't tell anyone, they're not allowed to say. Derech sod, not allowed to megala sod. But if they say we're not going to tell anyone, okay, it wasn't an issa from his perspective. On the contrary, he wants it to be known. Yeah, and therefore they don't have to hold it back, and that's why it will travel. Yeah, that's the difference in the two cases, right? And he says the implication of the Mukhi Yosef is that the key question really is whether they are allowed to say it. Is it mutter to reveal it or not? Okay, and that's the difference in the cases, right? And not like we said. So in other words, it's a lovely piece. Rabbi Leib has his own pshat. He argues through Svara is nothing to do with whether or not there's an Issa Lashon Hara, whether they're allowed to say anything, nothing to do with that, right? Because he says it's L'To Elis, like you would be able to say it. And therefore he argues that the main reason why it's not a good machor when the Ma'arer says don't tell anyone is because it's a flawed machor, because it's a flawed machor, because he doesn't want it to be known. It's like whispering something at home. It's irrelevant. Okay, then, by the way, you can't say anything. It's not, but that's beside the point. However, the Mukhi Yosef seems to imply, and with this, the Mukhi Yosef explains the difference between the two cases of whether he says don't say or they say don't say, right? That no, the reason is because it's also there's an issa. There's nothing wrong with the machor. The machor is fine, but because he says don't tell anyone, it's an issa for them to say. If it's an issa for them to say it, right? Then therefore they're not going to. Therefore, that's why it's not a valid machor, because it's not going to come to them. They're not allowed to reveal it. Whereas if the Eidim themselves say they're not going to tell them, there's no issa for them to say it. They can change their minds. They can tell anyone they like. So and therefore you've got a Rabbi of Yeshua Svara. Do you understand? Rabbi of Yeshua Svara was that anything a person doesn't think about, it will slip out. So the conclusion of the sugya according to Mukhi Yosef is, if there's an issa, it won't slip out. But if it's something where there's no issa, then it will slip out. Want to say what?
Machor is only valid once it travels.
No, the machor could be valid now, but the point is that we have to have a facility for it to travel. Okay.